Hello again. We ended up on day one taking a tour with Experience Yellowstone Tours, which was guided by Dale Franz, who is a world-renowned nature and wildlife photographer through the lower loop of Yellowstone. He stops at all of the great places as well as knowing all the secrets to finding the wildlife. That first shot you saw was at Sylvan Lake right near the east entrance, and we eventually ended up making our way through the Hayden Valley, looking out there on Lake Butte, looking out over Yellowstone Lake, and then moved here to this Nez Perce Ford picnic area along the Yellowstone River. It was very foggy that morning. You couldn't really see much in the valley, which is where a lot of the wildlife are that early in the morning, but still it created this mystical vibe with the fog covering all the river. There's a few people fishing and just enjoying the picnic. We had stopped there for sort of a breakfast snack and saw this view from the picnic area. Heading back a little bit north, we did end up seeing a black bear on the side of a hill chewing on some chokecherry bushes. That being, I think, their favorite food that they can find in Yellowstone. Was kind of hoping to see maybe a brown bear or grizzly bear, same bear, but only saw this one black bear the whole time we were there. He didn't really seem to care much that we were there, just sort of kept doing whatever he was doing. Nobody was hanging around. We were the only ones. We barely saw him just coming around the corner. One of the other people on tour was like, black bear, and we stopped to take some pictures, but he eventually just sort of moved along and ignored us. And as we worked our way through the Hayden Valley and the fog was starting to break, we came to this location known as the Mud Volcano Trail. It's a series of small little hot springs and pools. Predominantly this one, which gets its name, this is the Mud Volcano. It is just a spring that is boiling and gushing mud from underneath that sedimentary layer. Kind of a pungent smell here too. It was kind of putting off sulfur fume vibes, which was mostly coming from this one, which is known as the Dragon's Mouth Spring. I kind of wish the camera had picked up the sound that was emanating, but it was also kind of windy this morning, so it was a lot of wind noise. But the sound that was coming out of this hole was literally where it got its name from, like Dragon's Mouth Spring. You just think of a dragon's breath. That's the sound you heard as the water was churning in and out. It just made this deep sort of breathy moan it was kind of ominous. And we're working our way back through the loop. We stopped at the Sulphur Cauldron, which another sort of pungent, smelly area, and you can see here the turbulent pool right next to it. Most of that is steam, obviously from the temperature of the water, but that also releases a lot of sulfur gas into the air, which if you're not careful and you take a hit of that steam, you'll kind of lose your breath. And being with Dale, who has been in Yellowstone for over 40 years, knows all the secret places to go, and took us to this really neat location called Artist Point, which at a very specific time of day, you can see the lower falls here create this rainbow effect in the sunrise. It only lasts for about 10 or 12 minutes, and only when the sun is at a specific angle and time of year will you actually see this effect. It was actually kind of impressive watching it change from nothing to this rainbow color and then back to normal. And then we drove around to the other side to Lookout Point for a view above, looking down on the lower falls. So imagine from where we are right now, we were 10 miles across that looking out to the falls, and now we're quite literally 100 feet on top of them. And something else that kind of was impressive about Yellowstone is everywhere we went, the water was this emerald green color when it was moving. When it was still, it was like bath water. It was the clearest water I think I've ever seen, even even compared to, some high mountain streams here in Colorado where we are, this was clearer water, which was impressive, and moving at a pretty good clip. I think one of the park rangers told a story about, somebody who had fallen in upriver from this at a little bridge outcropping, and it had carried them downriver about 25 miles in the span of like 20 minutes. So the water's moving at a pretty good pace. And as you're driving along through Yellowstone, along the rivers specifically, keep an eye out to the sides, because you'll see little things like this. There was just a random vent. This was along the Gibbon River, heading to this area, which is the Norris Geyser Basin, which we didn't actually end up stopping to. We were trying to keep a schedule to see an Old Faithful eruption, but this is the Norris Geyser Basin from the road, which is another dozen or so different geysers and sort of prismatic colored pools. We did end up stopping at the Fountain Paint Pots Trail, which has another half dozen or so different pools and geysers and bubbling muck from clay. This isn't actually mostly from temperature more than it is gas release, which I thought was kind of interesting. You'll see some of the pools, like this one, that's bubbling and steaming, obviously from temperature, but not all of them are boiling from temperature, or some of them are just releasing like different types of gases. So you actually kind of have to be a little bit careful where you're standing, because this wind can easily change and blow this gas directly into your face. And while a lot of them are steam, some of them are pretty sort of toxic gas that'll sort of take your breath away if you're not careful. I think this is the Silex pool near the Celestine pool here at the Paint Pots Trail. And this area was actually kind of fascinating. You can see how it's just got this golden color to it. That's sort of a mineral-rich area that is starting to actually petrify these trees that are embedded within this little basin area here. And, you could walk quite literally 5 feet away from this petrified tree forest, for lack of a better word, where you can actually see the outside of the trees starting to mineralize. It was actually kind of fascinating to see. It also seemed like we were there kind of lucky to see a lot of the pools and geysers in an eruption state, which I guess doesn't happen all the time. They're churning real heavily, which happened from a lot of water flow a few weeks before that has just been filling up the water underneath, that then eventually allows them to sort of bubble over and erupt. And this is Old Faithful, which we did make it on time. We waited maybe 10 minutes before it started erupting. It kind of did a few teaser eruptions, which it does beforehand. It bubbles and churns and spits 3 or 4 times. Then it finally erupted. This was one of the shorter ones. Typically, Old Faithful eruptions can last a few minutes to upwards of 10 at times, kind of depending, with sort of a height average of about 130 feet, which one of the rangers walked by. I heard her talking to another one, said this one was around 135, which is kind of the average, but it can get higher depending on, obviously, the terrain underneath and sort of the water pressure that's been building up. And if you do go see Old Faithful, don't go to the normal parking area where you're supposed to. Old Faithful Inn, which is a hotel sort of on the south end of it, right now is closed, and it has its own parking lot, and that's kind of the best place to park. Nobody really knows about it. The signs don't tell you to go there. There's a gas station, a large gift shop, food you can buy, and as you can see here, I mean, this is how far we were away, literally 15 feet out of the parking lot. So you got a pretty good distance to see Old Faithful. Which, honestly, I think we kind of had the consensus we expected more from the eruption. All the, things you read and see online and sort of learn as a kid is this giant, magnificent explosion of water. And then in person, it was just kind of this little water shot up in the air, and then that was pretty much it. I can imagine if you're 10 feet away from it, it's pretty impressive, but with as short as it was and as high as the water goes, I think we were expecting a little bit more. And I think from there, that was sort of the end of day one. We just went back and didn't really see anything else more than we had already seen before. But on day two, coming back in the East Gate again, we were going to head to Old Faithful and then head along the upper area of Yellowstone and out and back around to Cody. But as you can see, there are buffalo again everywhere. You'll just see them. If you are looking for buffalo and you don't see them, you're probably not in Yellowstone. And if you stop and wait long enough, you can also see elk, and that was a snowshoe hare before his fur had turned white for the winter. Elk usually will stop traffic if somebody sees them. I think that particular spot there were well over 100 cars pulled over, so it was pretty easy to find the animals. But when we went back to Old Faithful, the idea was for us to walk down the Upper Geyser Basin Trail, which is a wooden boardwalk that kind of runs along the north end of Old Faithful. And there's, 20 plus geysers, springs, pools all along this walking path. We only did half of the trail. I think the full thing was like 4.5 miles walk, which is kind of a lot if you're not used to walking that far. Plus, 93 degrees, I think, that day. It was just a lot. So we just walked around and saw maybe, 15 or 20 of them stopping at the Chromatic and the Beauty Pool. But as you can see, there's no lack of scenery the whole time you're there. And what we learned when we got to the geyser or the Chromatic and the Beauty Pool is that they actually share the same water source. So the water that's coming in underneath them, when the Chromatic pool starts to erupt, the water level in the Beauty Pool will drop. And then sort of vice versa, when the water settles again, Beauty Pool will overflow and it'll drop down into the river below. So from Old Faithful, we went to the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is right along the Firehole River. This is the Grand Prismatic Spring itself, which, it in person looks... It's incredible. It's massive. I would say it's easily 150 yards in diameter, just my guess from what I could see, but there's absolutely no lack of color here. There's every color in the rainbow in this pool. And again, the steam rolling off of that, you can feel the heat coming off this water just from standing where we were, which is about 30 yards away. And every now and then the wind would shift and you just get this blast of steamed air. And it'll sort of kind of remind you sort of where you were and what you were looking out over. This is, an active volcanic area deep underground, causing these pools and this churning water effect. Before you actually get to Grand Prismatic, you pass this, which is the Excelsior Geyser Crater. It's a dormant geyser now and a steaming spring pool it's just massive. And this one, you could really feel the heat rolling off of it. And again, random buffalo walking down the road right outside the Prismatic Spring. And kind of a note to the Grand Prismatic Spring, if you do plan on going there, get there as early as you possibly can. We got there about 12:30, and I'm not joking, there was probably 500 cars. There were a parking lot that held maybe 75 cars, and then on both sides of the entrance were cars parked along the road, and you had to walk there, so get there early. From Grand Prismatic Spring, we went north, heading out of Yellowstone at the northeast gate leading into Montana. And going through the Lamar Valley, you can just see buffalo as far as the eye could see in the valley. You could stop every 3 miles and just see buffalo. They're everywhere. Heading back to Cody through the Lamar Valley, we came to this gorge and this tiny bridge called Sunlight Bridge, which is the highest bridge in Wyoming. looking down over 1,200 feet deep to the Sunlight River below, which this whole valley area sort of got its name from some trappers that got stuck there in the 1800s in some dense fog. And after about a week's time, the sun finally came up and illuminated sort of this gorge in this valley area, which eventually helped them get out of the valley, and they named it Sunlight Bridge from that. And then just before you get back to Cody, you kind of work your way up the side of the mountain, this winding road to Dead Indian Summit, which is not the greatest name, but it's named after the location the U.S. cavalry chased down the Nez Perce Indians and ultimately defeated them. So day 3 of Yellowstone, we instead now decided to go south and through the Grand Tetons, stopping here at Lewis Falls, which is at the south turn right before you get to Old Faithful, heading towards Grand Teton National Park. Really kind of nice little waterfall area. Water's, again, clear, had an emerald color as the sun hit it. And continuing along south, Buffalo, again, you know, kind of what I was saying before, if you're in Yellowstone and you don't see buffalo, I'd kind of consider you one of the most unlucky people there is, because they are everywhere. Done a little rogue buffalo walking by themselves, which I guess happens during the changes of the rut and the mating season. They'll sort of wander off on their own unless they find a herd. We saw 2 or 3 that we would call rogue buffalo that were just by themselves doing whatever they wanted to do. And heading out of Yellowstone South Gate, you come through by the Lewis River and eventually hit the Grand Tetons, which is a series of, I think, a dozen or so peaks. The tallest ones are like Traverse and Window Peaks, Mount Moran, Grand Teton. Easily seen, and you can just sort of see the violence in the upheaval of the ground just from volcanic and tectonic activity. The views in this park are amazing. The perspective of the mountains actually change as you're driving south through the park, which is actually kind of neat. That first one there is sort of at the north entrance, and this is sort of the south middle area from a place called Jenny Lake, which is a giant popular lake of people swimming and boating. There were 200 or 300 people here at that exact location, and then when we were heading south, another 200 or 300 at hiking trails leading through Jenny Lake. And coming out the south end of the Tetons, we went to Jackson, Wyoming, did a little shopping, and then heading back out north again. Buffalo, as far as you can see, just endless miles of buffalo herds in the valley. It was actually kind of annoying at this point because of how much traffic would stop to see them. But yeah, overall, our trip to Yellowstone was amazing. Big shout out to Dale Franz of Experienced Yellowstone Tours. If you need a tour guide, that's the guy I would go with. He's stationed in Cody, Wyoming. Being a wildlife photographer and been doing tours through Yellowstone his whole life, he knows where to go and all the secrets. He's got special parking spots and knows the history really better than anyone else. Also, if you did not see the other video of the Wheels of Wonderment campground, which is where we stayed, another fantastic campground, check out that video. Otherwise, please like and subscribe, and thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you on the next adventure.